Over the years, the Avengers have had many different members that have come and gone. Some stick around, but some of these members simply don't make enough of an impact on the team to hold on to their memberships. Although his redemption arc is really great and has so much potential, it sort of falls flat. Basically, the Thing one day sits Sandman down and tries to turn him to the good side, and it works. With Sandman now finding his stride as a hero, he first joins the Outlaws, a team of reformed Spider-Man enemies, and is then given a membership to the Avengers. It's all going in the right direction for the former villain until he's promptly hypnotized by Wizard and turned back to the dark side. Honestly, this isn't even Sandman's fault, but his quick turn back to evil gets in the way of him being anything close to a functional member of the Avengers. I almost didn't even put him on the list just because he barely even does anything for the team after he's inducted. And even tragically after that, he even goes off to reform the Sinister Six right after leaving the Avengers Reserve, which basically erases any good he may have done during his time as an Avenger. At number 9, we have Justice, FKA Marvel Boy. Although he's known as a pretty well-respected hero, at least in his later years, Justice still doesn't do much for the Avengers during his time with them. When he first joins, he comes off as more of a fan than anything else, making some rookie mistakes right off the bat. He also finds a way to break his leg, which isn't very common for a superhero. Much of his lack of maturity in the group is due to his worship for the other members of the Avengers, so it's hard to blame him, although he does do some pretty good work in planning to take down Ultron. Later, he ends up teaching for the Avengers Academy alongside Hank Pym, Tigra, Quicksilver, and Speedball. But overall, this character's time with the Avengers is wrought with scattered accomplishments and distracting love triangle storylines that just make him a much less effective member of the team. At number 8 is Sentry, who joins the Mighty Avengers after having one foot in the door of the New Avengers for a while. This guy is a poor addition to the team simply based on issues of power imbalance and, unfortunately, his own mental health. On the power side of things, he's so powerful that he sort of drowns out the efforts of the Avengers as a team, which in many ways is a good problem to have. But on top of this, due to his mental health issues, he tends to have trouble reining in his power set and often second guesses himself. I feel badly for the Sentry, and I only put him on this list because sometimes people just aren't right for a big team. When it becomes clear that Sentry is fighting some internal battles, he is still known as the most powerful member of the team, but just needs to figure himself out first. For example, at one point, Sentry attacks Ultron at a moment when the team needed him to hold back, and sort of ruins the whole plan. Although the attack was in retaliation for Ultron seemingly killing his wife, so it's not that unexpected. It's just one of the many times that Sentry has troubles keeping his composure and taking on the responsibilities of an Avenger. He's not a bad hero, just maybe not right for the best superhero alliance ever created. At number 7, we have US Agent, or John Walker. Formerly a stand-in for Captain America, his true colors show when Steve Rogers returns and Walker is renamed US Agent, which is just a bunko name if you ask me. I had to put him on the list even though he does the honorable deed of taking over as Captain America when Steve Rogers goes AWOL and becomes Nomad. He's just a little too intense on the patriotism front and brings the team down as a result. A huge part of Steve Rogers' influence on the Avengers is his ability to shelve the burden of America's unofficial but basically official superhero and keep his intentions focused on acting in favor of others. He's able to put aside his pride and work for the team, whereas Walker does the opposite. He does work for the team, but it's a big lesson in the importance of good attitude because they have the same powers, but something about John Walker's suffocating patriotism and inherent arrogance that comes with it just proves that no one could do the job like Steve could. And once again, US Agent is just such a lame name to take on, unrelated. Especially after having gone as Captain America for a time, it's just, maybe I just feel badly for him in a way. At number 6, we have Swordsman. With the biggest accolade being that he trains Hawkeye, it's hard not to squeeze this guy onto the list. Basically, Swordsman starts off as a circus performer who is known for demonstrating his mastery with bladed weaponry. He was more of a showman than a superhero realistically, and also more of a villain than a superhero if we're being honest. After losing all his money due to his gambling addiction, he decides to steal from the carnival paymaster, and when a young Hawkeye chases him, Swordsman almost kills his own apprentice. And then, fast forwarding, the way that he's eventually admitted into the Avengers is basically through fraud. He teams up with Mandarin and sends a fake message posing as Iron Man to the Avengers to allow himself into the group. and it works. Being a double agent for Mandarin, he later lures the Avengers into a with the intention of blowing them up. Although he does try to dismantle it in a moment of regret, he's still dejected from the Avengers anyway. I think they just sensed he was screwing around with them. He then basically just falls back into a life of crime while picking up a drinking habit along the way, which isn't part of the reason I put him on the list. This is kind of sad. He's a very troubled character and just had some nasty intentions and tendencies. Not the most noble of the Avengers by any means. At number 5, we have Jack of Hearts. This guy is notoriously one of the worst Avengers because his most notable act as part of the team is murdering another one of the members. Although he does this while under the influence of Scarlet Witch, there's no hiding from something so brutal. I mean, the Avenger he kills is Ant-Man, who's a really important member of the team. Aside from this though, Jack of Hearts also just spends such a short time with the Avengers that even his heroic deeds are sort of weak, regardless of the tragedy. Being the 52nd member of the Avengers, he's brought on specifically to help take on Kang the Conqueror. They all team up with the Justice League and a huge battle goes down. And then promptly after this, Jack tragically decides he needs to end his own life for various reasons, taking a villain with him who had killed Ant-Man's daughter. But it's pretty ironic that the next time he makes an appearance, he blows himself up and takes Ant-Man with him. Just a messy run as an Avenger through and through. At number 4, we have Stingray. This guy isn't ever really a true member of the Avengers. He is officially, but he only seems to jump on as part of the group when they need him, like when they need access to his underwater hydro base or when an inverted Doctor Doom brings him on to rescue civilians from a river. He's sort of their fringe friend that they use for water-related issues. Could this be a case of lazy writing? Perhaps. But it seems more like he's not really a strong enough character to do much more than pop in and out of the scene when water gets involved. He also almost fights Iron Man due to a misunderstanding right when he joins the team and even campaigns to have him removed from the Avengers, which is just an awful way to start. At number 3 is Star Fox. This guy is just a bad hero. He's not even really a hero. His powers are extremely problematic in that he can basically gain the love of a woman on command. But it's not really love because it's artificial and it only lasts for so long. So when he uses his powers, these women often wake up not knowing where they are or what they've done, which is naturally a pretty deplorable thing to inflict on a person with your powers. And he doesn't even seem to feel badly after it either. He just gets his clothes on and jumps out the window like, "See you later, good luck piecing together the last 12 hours. Otherwise known as Eros of Titan, this guy is actually Thanos' older brother, so this sort of explains the evil nature of his powers. At least in the comics they're kind of aware of his nasty nature, because the woman who he's used his powers on eventually come out and sue him because of what he does, which has to be a first for a superhero. I'm honestly just surprised that this dude even had a membership to the Avengers in the first place. He just kind of sucks. At number 2 is D-Man, or Demolition Man. This dude should never really have been brought on to join the Avengers. He's sort of just this unmotivated, scraggly guy with a horribly designed suit. He just steals Wolverine's and Daredevil's costumes and makes a tragic mashup of the two. His origins are that he's basically a wrestler that was given superhuman strength before befriending Captain America. When Cap needs to reform the Avengers, he thinks it's a good idea to bring on D-Man to join the team. But this choice is pretty obviously out of sympathy for the guy because he doesn't really do much when he does join. He's then sort of left behind and lost in time, becoming more and more unmotivated as the years go on, eventually living in homelessness before becoming a sort of villain. Not the best track record for even an alum of the Avengers. But I can't totally rag on him. The Avengers have insanely high standards and some people just want to hang out and eat sub sandwiches. So that's D-Man. The number 1 spot on this list goes to Dr. Druid. Having been trained under the same mentor who trained Doctor Strange, you'd think this guy would have gone on to be a great member of the Avengers. Well, at first he wasn't actually known as such a bad hero by his own right, but after joining the team, it becomes pretty obvious that he wasn't destined for greatness. His attitude is arrogant, he carries a lot of insecurity about living in Strange's shadow for so long, and he also has a big weakness to the charm of women, proving him to have a pretty low emotional intelligence. And this is a pretty major fault when you're supposed to be an Avenger because you need to be able to have a strong character regardless of whatever your power set is. This also tends to lead him to be a subordinate to women in positions of power like Captain Marvel, who he continually undermines until his disloyalty leads to her being seriously injured in battle. He then tries to convince everyone to name him the successor as the new chairman. This guy, Dr. Druid, was just kind of a weak-minded fool who was conniving and subordinate through and through. It's surprising he was ever brought on board with the Avengers because he really proves himself to be one of their weakest links while he's there.
Number 10, Dazzler. I am really loath to put Dazzler on this list at all. Just feels bad. If you've been watching Top 10 Nerd for a while, then you likely know I am a big Alison Blair fan. I became one after I read through some of her original series and I fell in love with Alison, and I also fell in love with her power set. I actually really like it. However, as I've said before, having some of the worst powers doesn't mean that you're a bad character. It doesn't even mean that your powers are really all that bad. After all, it's kind of just in how you use them. But Alison, as Daz, typically prefers to use her powers to add light effects to her shows as a performer. She's been a superhero before, yes, and we've seen her do some pretty crazy things with her powers, yes, but it's not the life that she likes to live. She would actually rather downplay her abilities somewhat in terms of heroics, and then just use them to make pretty light shows in addition to her masterful singing abilities for people to enjoy, which, you know, makes them, I guess, the worst in terms of like superhero stuff. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Go check out Most Amazing Top 10 Anime. It's our newest channel, it's super exciting, and who knows, maybe one day I'll even go on and do an anime list for some reason. Could be fun. Number 9, Mr. Fantastic. This might be a massive hot take, but hey, you know, I'm going for it. You can come for me in the comments if you want to, that's fine. Well, I think Mr. Fantastic as a character is pretty cool, and his brilliance definitely cannot be denied. His power set has to be one of the worst amongst the people on his team. Am I right or am I right? I mean, Johnny Storm is the Human Torch who can fly around and literally engulf himself in flames. How cool is that? Ben Grimm is the Thing, who is tough and strong enough to face off against the Hulk, and Susan Storm Richards is Invisible Woman, the real powerhouse of the team who can turn invisible and create force fields big or small enough to defend against or defeat almost any opponent. Now, what does Mr. Fantastic have? He can stretch. Really good? It's really more useful in specific circumstances, so that's why he's making my cut. Number 8, Bouncing Boy. Bouncing Boy is a member of the Legion of Superheroes. While other names have been suggested for Charles Tane, Bouncing Boy is the one that is stuck. And when I explain his powers, you're gonna see why we went with Bouncing Boy here. Charles apparently gained his powers after drinking an experimental super plastic formula. I feel like that would kill you, really. As a result, he became extremely, well, bouncy. He can inflate into a perfectly round ball and initially would use himself as a sort of like wrecking ball, if you will, honing and mastering his ability to direct himself as he bounced around. Later on, he would also become somewhat kind of like elastic in regards to his physiology, making him more bouncy. Initially, he was someone who tried out for the Legion of Superheroes multiple times and was rejected due to his powers being even too ridiculous for the team to consider. But the Prime Earth/Rebirth version of the character has successfully become a member of that team, so yay. Number 7, El Guapo. El Guapo hails from the strange mutant team known as Ecstatics. However, like most who have joined that team, he did not last too long. He died less than 10 issues after his first appearance and introduction. Poor El Guapo. El Guapo is Robbie Rodriguez, and his powers allow him to control a skateboard, but not all skateboards, just one skateboard. One that he happens to form a symbiotic connection with. But even that couldn't really save him, and he ended up dying, actually impaled by his own skateboard. It's rough sometimes. That's the Ecstatics way. Number 6, Peeper. Peeper is one of my favorite mutants, but sadly that does not save him like others before him, who I also love, from making this list. Sorry, Peeper. After all, this is part 3, and I already had some heroes that I loved in part 2, so what can I say? I guess I tend to love heroes whose powers actually seem less than super, so these are great lists for me. It's part of what I love about those characters, to be honest. Peeper is a mutant who, honestly, all the other mutant all-stars that he's interacted with recently have been super sweet too, and I love that. I'm here for that. Peeper's powers have to do with his physical mutation, which is that he has enlarged eyes. With his eyes, he can see things that others can't, possessing different forms of sight. Currently, Peeper uses his powers to help out his fellow teammates as a member of Swords the Six, although he's not really like part of the main Six because they're teleporters. He's not a teleporter, but he works with Sword and the Six to help expand the areas of mutant technology. Number 5. Penance. Penance was once the hero known as Speedball, who is now back to being Speedball again actually, thank goodness. His real name is Robert Baldwin. Baldwin decided to change up his superhero appearance and name following the instigating event that led to the first Civil War. In the comics, this was actually similar to, but different from the MCU and the Sokovia Accords. Similar in the sense that many people did die, many of them, in the case of the comics, civilians. Different in the sense that it wasn't a tragedy at a political gathering, but rather happened as a result of the New Warriors pursuing supervillains in the interest of their reality TV show, which, you know, would later become political because one of the team members, Nitro, went off and kind of killed a bunch of civilians and the rest of his teammates in the process, with Speedball being one of the few people to actually survive that incident. As a result, it was said that his powers had changed due to his guilt, and they could only be activated when he experienced physical pain. This caused Robert Baldwin to change his name and his appearance, being known as Penance, in honor of all the lives lost that he felt responsible for, and wearing an Iron Maiden inspired supersuit covered in spikes, as many spikes I believe as there were casualties, so that he could trigger his powers as needed. Number 4. Tag. Tag is definitely one of the weirdest superheroes out there when it comes to his abilities. He is Brian Cruz, a mutant whose powers allow him to tag someone psionically, inciting a telepathic urge in other people to either run away or run toward the person he's tagged. The person who's it? He could use his powers to tag multiple people, but if making them emit a psionic signal that encouraged others to run away from them, the range would actually top out at about 100 meters away. Then the urge for people to run would stop. So it's really weirdly specific. Number 3. Super Dupont. Super Dupont hails from a French comic strip from the 1970s. Super Dupont was meant to be a hero built on French nationalism, but that also spoofed the ridiculousness of American superhero comics as well as American stereotypes of the French. Super Dupont's power set is like Superman's, but he's not nearly as powerful. He can fly, and he's also a master in the art of savate, a style of fighting known as French boxing. Super Dupont in the series is a mysterious figure who is said to be the son of one of the unknown soldiers buried under the Arc de Triomphe. Although how that soldier then would remain unknown, it seems kind of questionable, because if he was your father, wouldn't you know who he was? So you no longer be an unknown soldier. He fights against the Anti-France organization, which is exclusively made up of all foreigners, non-French people. These people speak a fictional language in the comics that is a mishmash of non-French languages, and it's called Anti-Francais, which I think is super ridiculous. Number 2. Dog Welder 2. Dog Welder was high up on our first part to this list, but did you know there isn't just one Dog Welder out there? I know, it's shocking considering that his power set in essence involves welding people to, well, I mean, you know, it's in his name. And it's pretty unspeakable if you ask me. How is this a hero at all? Never mind, how did we make a second version of him? Dog Welder 2 ends up being possessed by the welding equipment of the former Dog Welder, and even ends up at one point welding his family. Unable to resist the compulsion to weld, he must weld. It's a curse. Despite all this, he's still considered a hero somehow. He also ends up joining along with the superhero team known as Section 8. Dog Welder 2 is even more ridiculous than the first in that he learns the true origins of his powers actually come from the Egyptian god Anubis, and also saves the world by welding 2 stars together, one of which is Sirius, also known as the Dog Star. Get it? Number 1. Six-Pack. Six-Pack is the leader of Section 8, the same team Dog Welder is on, both the first and the second Dog Welder. His powers, or abilities rather, involve him having a high tolerance for drinking, and it's been implied at one point that he may, and I'd like to emphasize the word may, have reality warping powers. But if he does, he doesn't really know how to use them. This was something that the many angled ones sensed in him when they faced off against him, and he was apparently able to create a force field, but he didn't know how he'd done it. Six-Pack is also known as Sydney Speck. He is generally known for being intoxicated, hence his name, which is in reference to drinks, and in fact being completely sober can work against him. While sober, Six-Pack is forced to face the harsh reality of his life, which can make him question what he is doing and why. I mean, considering his power set and his general focus, that makes sense. Fair enough.
At number 10 is the infamous Gold Balls, aka Egg. Mentioned a handful of times already on this channel, Gold Balls is one of the more bizarre mutants to be given as much panel time as he has. Part of the new generation of mutants, Fabio Medina can summon golden balls on command, which don't actually have any destructive or useful properties whatsoever, at least on their own. Although it is soon discovered that when combined with the powers of 4 other mutants, Gold Balls is able to create a force field of immortality that can resurrect fallen mutants and protect others from death on the island of Krakoa. So there is, after all, a pretty impressive use for Fabio's abilities, but only when paired with the powers of 4 other mutants. On his own, he just squeezes onto this list. At number 9 we have Matter Eater Lad. This guy has a pretty rough set of powers which allow him to metabolize just about anything he swallows. That's right, the enzymes in his stomach are so strong that he can break down and digest anything no matter how large, even if they're radioactive and or otherwise damaging. Now, although he is a pretty silly superhero, Matter Eater Lad isn't at the number 1 spot because I can in some sense see how this power might be of use in the right situation. For example, let's say you have to get rid of a bomb that's about to explode. The chances are that this guy will be able to eat that problem away. Or if you need to get rid of a parasite that's threatening to take over the world, he could simply gobble it up so it can't repopulate. So yes, on paper, a hero with superpowered stomach enzymes sounds like a total joke, but I would only say he's mostly a joke. At number 8 is Rainbow Girl. Hailing from the DC universe, Rainbow Girl has the ability to use the colors of the rainbow to take on any human emotion she desires on command. Red represents anger, blue, hope, and green, willpower, and they all make up a pretty bad superhero, if we're being honest. Online, this character is even viewed as a symbol of an older time when male writers were a lot more simplistic and offensive with their portrayals of female characters. And if these emotion-driven powers based on the colors of the rainbow don't hit that home, her pheromone shield should be a hint that this is true, since that power is used to make her the most popular girl around. At number 7 is Skin. This guy just creeps me out. I've covered him before. Mainly because of how gross his powers are, as well as his name, but also because of how depressing and off-putting he looks in every panel that he appears in. Angelo Espinosa, aka Skin, has access to about 6 feet of extra skin that he can use to stretch around his enemies or use as a rope to swing around with. He's basically like Reed Richards, except his bones and muscles don't stretch along with his skin, and also Mr. Fantastic's limit doesn't stop at 6 feet. Skin is just a very unfortunate hero who might wish that he'd never gotten superpowers to begin with. At number 6 is Color Kid. This superhero has powers just as his name suggests, and not much more. He has the ability to change the color of anything on command. Part of the legion of substitute heroes and the assistant to a scientist on his home planet, Color Kid always seems to be in the shadow of greatness. And unfortunately, his powers don't help this cause very much either. Being able to change the color of anything isn't really such a useful power and often proves to disappoint his teammates, especially in combat situations. At number 5 is Arm Fall Off Boy. This guy is pretty clearly a gag character, but he's technically part of the official DC universe, so he's fair game for the list. Arm Fall Off Boy, worse name, has the incredible ability to detach his limbs and use them as melee weapons. As gross and as weird as this power is, it seems like he at least believes in himself, which is something. In one panel, we see him proudly popping his left arm off with a big plorp sound, preparing onlookers to be, quote, astounded by his power. He obviously doesn't have a huge backstory, so it's hard to expound too much on him, but he definitely makes history for being one of the worst heroes, if nothing else. At number 4 is the one and only, the infamous Bailey Hoskins, with the power to self-destruct. This is one of the more tragic superheroes who ends up losing his life after only 4 issues when he finally uses his power. We can assume that this character should land on a list like this every time, considering the comic book series that he's featured in is literally titled X-Men Worst X-Man Ever. But to be fair, this mini-series is known to be a pretty epic read considering the stakes at hand during the run. Bailey has to decide whether or not he's gonna use his powers when an evil mutant dictator threatens to take over. At number 3 we have the people of New York City. Yes, even though it's hard to imagine calling them superheroes, at one point, the people of NYC are endowed with a very subtle power given to them by Reed Richards. And the power is to be able to tell which direction is north at all times. This is a response to the Spider Island evil plan set by Jackal, where he unleashes an army of little bugs that give people Spider-Man's powers. So to put everyone back on even keel, Richards decides that everyone should be turned into superheroes. The only thing is that to keep things simple, the ability given to the population of the city is so lame that it has gone down as one of the worst superpowers of all time, and has forced the innocent people of New York City to appear on this rather embarrassing list. At number 2, we have Dog Welder. Now, aside from this guy having one of the worst superpowers of all time, I also just think he's one of the worst superheroes based on who he is as a person. If you're a dog person, skip ahead to the next section, because basically this bozo goes around and kills dogs that he finds in alleyways and then calls it a superpower to weld them to people's faces. And he's still considered a good guy. Now, I don't really understand the joke here, but if it is a joke, it's so over the top and weird that I don't even get it. I feel like DC was trying to come up with a meme character here for a laugh, but I don't like the part where he's just killing dogs, nor do I even get it at all. Dog Welder is a big thumbs down in my books, and I think he rightfully deserved a spot high on this list. Shame on you, Dog Welder. At number 1 is the silliest, worst superhero of all, with respect, J. Pennington Pennypacker, aka the Almighty Dollar. Living most of his life as an average citizen working as an accountant, Pennypacker eventually attends the Run-a-Monk self-esteem camp, which turns out to be the most fateful decision he's ever made. After attending the camp for a time, we learn that it's all just a front for a mysterious scientist who's working on completing a device that could give anyone superpowers. And when J. Pennington Pennypacker is endowed with his own powers, he's given an ability that's perfectly suited for his ridiculous name. He is, from that moment onwards, endowed with the ability to shoot pennies out of his wrists at high velocities. Although he only appears in one issue of Marvel's NFL Super Pro back in 1992, the Almighty Dollar is technically an official part of the Marvel canon and must be treated as such.
Number 10. The Flash and Captain Boomerang. Here's a heck of a blast from the past. Way back in 1961's Flash number 124, Captain Boomerang suddenly busts out new boomerangs that can travel through time. Yeah, it was Silver Age. Flash and Elongated Man team up to catch him, but then they see that aliens are attacking. It turns out the boomerang had actually traveled through the aliens' dimension, and they thought Earth was preparing to attack, so they attacked first. Boomerang ends up joining Flash and Elongated Man to take out the aliens, and thanks them by turning the alien fatigue guns on them, strapping the Flash to a giant boomerang and trying to launch him into space. It didn't work, but still, what a jerk. Number 9. Superman and Lex Luthor. In the Forever Evil story arc, the crime syndicate from Earth 3 made their way to Earth 1 and took out a bunch of Earth 1's heroes. But Lex Luthor stepped up, recruiting the surviving heroes as well as a bunch of villains and taking the kryptonite implant out of Superman so he could help too. Thanks to his efforts, Lex was actually invited to the Justice League, which he accepted. Number 8. DC's heroes and DC's villains. When the Anti-Monitor attacked in Crisis on Infinite Earths, the Monitor recruited a bunch of heroes to take on his counterpart from the Antimatter universe. After the Flash took him out, the villains looked at the remaining Earths and went, oh hey, let's just take over these alternate worlds. But then it turned out the Anti-Monitor was still alive and the villains were sent on their own mission to save the universe, but failed. Then Spectre saved the day, merging the 5 Earths into one, and a final epic battle occurred, with heroes and villains fighting to save the universe. This one even had Darkseid joining the fight against Anti-Monitor, who was eventually defeated. Whew, that was a long story, but pretty cool that this was basically a team up of everyone. Number 7. The Avengers and Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror took over 40th century Earth and tried to marry Princess Ravonna, but she challenged him to bring the Avengers to the future and beat them if he wanted to marry her. So he did, and also took over Ravonna's kingdom. Because why not? Well, there's a reason why not, because this caused his warlords to call for Ravonna's execution, and when Kang said no, they took control from him, and he got so he freed the Avengers and worked with them and a group of like-minded citizens to take back power. Then he sent the Avengers back home, and he lived happily ever after with Ravonna, right? Nah, she sacrificed herself to save him and died anyway. Oops. Number 6. Adam Warlock and Thanos. Way back in the day, Adam Warlock teamed up with Thanos to achieve something that Thanos was totally cool with, killing Adam Warlock. Adam had been struggling to deal with his future self, the evil tyrant Magus. He decided that the best thing to do would be to enlist Thanos to help him to go to the future and stop himself from from turning into Magus. And since Magus was created to counter Thanos, he was like, yes, I will help you. It worked. He absorbed his future self into the Soul Stone, and ever since, the pair have been seen a bunch of times, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as friends. It's a bit confusing between the two of them, but that's okay. Number 5. Doctor Doom and Doctor Strange. Yeah, it's a Doctor Dream Team. All they need now is Doctor Who, and Doctor Fate, and Doctor Manhattan. Okay, there are a lot of Doctor heroes. Anyway, Doom's mother, Cynthia, has been damned to hell after selling her soul to Mephisto to make Latveria a homeland for her people, the Roma. Every Midsummer Eve thereafter, Doom battled hell to try to win back his mom's soul, but kept losing. So he performed a ritual to enlist Doctor Strange's help, and the two went to hell. Problem is, Doom turned on Strange and tried to trade him for his mom, and his mom was all, oh hell nah, I won't be freed like that, and refused. But the refusal was such a good act that not only was she freed, but she went to heaven. I gotta say, the betrayal was awful, but I might have done the same thing if my mom was in hell. My mom's pretty great. Number 4. The X-Men and the Evil Mutants. The X-Men comics are known for tackling world issues, and during the Cold War, they took on nuclear war. Factor 3 was a faction of mutants who intended to be the third factor in the Cold War, to compete with the other two factors, the East and the West. A bunch of bad mutants joined the third factor, but when Professor X revealed that the leader was an alien who was trying to start a nuclear war, the mutants set aside their differences and joined forces to defend Earth from their common enemy. You know the best part? Nobody even betrayed anyone. Once they were done, they just went their separate ways. Awesome. Number 3. Spider-Man and Venom. There had to be at least one Spidey-Venom team up, and I figure I should go with the OG for this one, which started in Amazing Spider-Man number 361. Spider-Man and Venom had fought each other countless times, but when Venom's spawn Carnage came onto the scene, the two had to set aside their differences and work together, because Carnage is crazy powerful. But this time, rather than the villain turning on the hero, Spider-Man turned on Venom once Carnage was dispatched, containing him with the help of the Fantastic Four, which is kinda mean. You made a promise. Number 2. Batman and the Joker. In the Batman Europa series, Batman becomes infected by the Colossus virus. In search of its origins, Bruce heads to Europe and finds the Joker already there. Turns out he's infected too. In a not so rare team up, the pair decides to work together to find a cure. They have pretty hilarious chemistry as they travel across Europe. It's definitely one of my favorite team ups with these two, but for me, nothing is as epic as the next one. Number 1. Batman and the Joker. This one is a super recent one from Dark Knight's Metal number 6, and it's just so wicked. Batman was fighting the Batman Who Laughs, and he was pretty outmatched since Batman Who Laughs has all his training without his moral code. Just when Batman's about to be killed, the freaking Joker shoots Batman Who Laughs with a bang gun. Turns out Batman and the Joker had joined up, and Batman was able to save the Overmonitor thanks to his good buddy / arch enemy. I legit got shivers when Batman goes, I'm going for the leg, and Joker goes, I call his face! Seriously, even if you haven't read the other issues, read this one. It's so epic. Number 10. Spider-Man and SNL. In Marvel Team Up number 74, Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson went to watch a taping of Saturday Night Live. John Belushi is playing his samurai character and ends up getting his hands on Silver Samurai's ring. When Silver Samurai comes to get his ring, Spidey has to help John Belushi and the other not ready for primetime players battle against Silver Samurai and his crew. The SNL cast puts up a pretty good fight, dressed as heroes like Miss Marvel and Thor, and eventually the day is saved. This actually would have been a pretty amazing sketch, especially since that cast was one of the best SNL casts ever. Number 9. Batman and Sherlock Holmes. This one actually made quite a bit of sense. Two of the world's greatest detectives working together in one mysterious comic. When a descendant of the infamous Moriarty starts causing trouble, Batman turns to none other than Sherlock Holmes for help. But the unlikely thing is that this actually took place in modern day while Holmes was alive in the 1800s. But it's okay because they had a super plausible explanation for his long life. A distillation of royal jelly from bees and the rarefied atmosphere of Tibet. Sounds legit. Number 8. Batman and Spider-Man. So this is one of the more likely on this list since at least both characters are superheroes, but it's still a pretty weird combination. Not only are they from different universes, with Batman being DC and Spider-Man being Marvel, but they have totally different personalities. Batman is the stoic, silent defender of the night, while Spider-Man is the wisecracking young kid who loves to make dumb jokes. In the same issue, we saw Joker and Carnage getting along splendidly, which I suppose isn't much of a surprise. A lot of people didn't like this, but I thought the Abbott and Costello relationship that Bats and Spidey had was pretty funny. Number 7. Superman and the Quick Bunny. Okay, this one was just the worst. While this may seem like just some clever ad for Nesquik, it was actually a freaking terrible ad for Nesquik. Seriously, they managed to ruin Superman and Nesquik in one short comic. Superman faces up against Weather Wizard and for some reason can't handle it alone and needs help from the little bunny. Then they have a chocolate milk drinking contest and Superman can't even win that. The only good thing about this comic is it reminded me of all those awesome Nesquik commercials from the 90s. Remember when he threw his cue into the pool and it turned to chocolate? Those were the days. Number 6. Superman and Bugs Bunny. Yep, turns out Soups has a thing for rabbits. In this 4-part series, we saw a bunch of heroes working alongside Looney Tunes characters. After Mixie's Pitlick and Yo-Yo the Dodo brought the two worlds together. To make matters worse, and at the same time way better, the characters had their personalities mixed up too. Seeing the Flash and Roadrunner running their butts off and Daffy Duck acting like Batman, so basically Darkwing Duck, was just amazing. Number 5. Archie and the Punisher. In one issue of Archie, the Punisher came to town hunting a criminal who looked much like Archie. But then the Punisher meets Archie and realizes that he's straight up the most wholesome person ever and doesn't harm him. This is actually a pretty decent one since it took place in Archie comics. The absurd and lighthearted atmosphere that generally comes from these crossovers worked pretty well. Number 4. Batman and the Ninja Turtles. In the 6-issue series Batman/Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we see, well, Batman meeting the Ninja Turtles. The Turtles and Shredder find themselves transported to Gotham City, coming across Batman and a number of villains as they try to find their way back home. They have pretty weird chemistry, kinda like Batman and Spider-Man, but 4 of them. And Batman even chastises Michelangelo for chewing with his mouth open. As good as Splinter is at teaching martial arts, he clearly slacked on teaching them manners. I think it's time for Bruce to pick up 4 new wards. Number 3. The Sonic Gang and a bunch of inappropriate image characters. In Archie Adventure Series number 7, Sonic Super Special, we saw the Sonic Gang team up with a cast of characters from Image Comics. This was super weird, but pretty cool, seeing the Sonic characters battling it up with some pretty cool Image characters like Shadowhawk and Savage Dragon. It wasn't the most fitting combination because the Image characters are a little more adult than the Sonic ones, but the worst part is that Spawn was barely in it. Even though he was on the cover and is probably Image Comics' most famous character, he was just in one panel saying no, and then bailing. It's like Image Comics could only afford him for one quick cameo scene, but like Spawn isn't some famous actor who's super busy. You can draw him all you want. They didn't even include him in the final fight. So lame. And it had such potential. Number 2. X-Men and Star Trek. This was another of the comics that as a comic was pretty mediocre, but the fact that it was Star Trek and X-Men all in one comic made it just amazing. Now, I know what you're thinking. This must have been done because Patrick Stewart was in both X-Men and Star Trek. Well, sadly this comic was released in 1996. 4 years before Stewart played Professor X on screen. So they missed what would have been a pretty hilarious opportunity. The comic did still have its moments though, my favorite being when Spock knocks out Wolverine with a Vulcan nerve pinch. Yeah, give it a read if you're a fan of the two franchises, just don't expect literary gold. Number 1. The Punisher and Eminem. In a one-off Punisher comic in 2009, we saw Eminem added to the mix, at first fighting against the Punisher until he realizes that Castle had come to protect him. Because apparently Barracuda, another artist with whom Eminem grew up, was hired by the frickin' Parents Music Council to kill Eminem. Yeah, that's the trick. This guy's promoting violence to our kids, so we're gonna kill him. Honestly, the comic itself was pretty awful. Eminem's animation stuck out like a sore thumb for some reason, and somehow he managed to pistol whip Punisher and knock him out. But it was still pretty epic to see Eminem and the Punisher in a comic together. Yeah, was this done mostly to hype up his new album? Definitely. Does that make it less amazing? Not even a little.
Number 10. Yeah, we don't actually know if this is a costume or not, given the Tick was always sort of a parody character, and his identity and origins are unknown. But in the new Amazon Prime series based on the character, Overkill, after failing to do any kind of damage to the Tick, grabs the Tick's antennae, causing him to wince and remark that it's sensitive, which might be the first time this character has acknowledged any kind of weakness. So, the Tick's weakness is his costume's antenna. Assuming it's a costume. Number 9. Valkyrie for a time used to have the weakness that she could not attack women. If she tries, any pain she inflicts she feels upon her own body, effectively rendering her useless in a fight. This restriction was pretty flexible, some writers included it, some didn't, and once Valkyrie returned to her own body, it was written out for good. That is such a bizarre weakness for a Valkyrie to have. I mean, they're the famously badass women of Norse mythology. You think they'd want to show that off fighting other badass women? Number 8. This one's actually kind of depressing. Early on in the Human Torch's run, one of his many villains were a man and a woman who went by the names Asbestos Man and Asbestos Girl. Asbestos, for those who don't know, was at the time a common means of fireproofing and was used a lot in buildings. So it kind of made sense, at least in a comic book sense, to use it as a theme for a villain who could take on a literal man of fire. Or at least it would have had it not been for what we learned about asbestos later. Specifically that asbestos was a very potent carcinogen, which tragically ties into the fates of these two villains. Asbestos Lady is revealed to have succumbed to mesothelioma, a rare cancer that typically develops from exposure to asbestos, while Asbestos Man is later shown attempting to rob a fast food joint while still pulling his oxygen tank, notably remarking that he's a cancer survivor. So yeah, Asbestos went from being Johnny Storm's weakness to literally everybody's. Number 7. Power Girl, after being injured by a stick, remarks that she's vulnerable to any unprocessed natural raw material, which includes a lot of things, let's say that. And that is kind of a massive liability, especially on a planet that needs trees to supply oxygen. It's like when the aliens in the movie Signs come to Earth but they're allergic to water. Kind of a massive oversight. Thankfully this weakness has gone ignored since then, but yeah. Didn't really think that one through. Number 6. So Daredevil operates out of Hell's Kitchen, which is in New York City. You know, the city that never sleeps, a famously noisy city. Which is fine, I'm a city guy myself, but when you give a superhero who's blind the weakness of noise, you effectively render him fairly ineffective outside of rural areas. But let's say he's adapted to the noise of New York. That's fine. But if anyone, say a villain, ever finds out how his powers work, all they need to do is pack an air horn and you've effectively disabled him. And really, that's a bit of a liability. Number 5. Imagine this. You're a hero. You've just saved the city, and in your perfect, unrecognizable disguise, you're approached by a reporter. This is your first time saving the city. This is your first time saving anything. And you want to get off on the right foot. You want the people to know you. The reporter, after announcing your bravery live to everyone watching, asks you, "What is your name, stranger?" And you just stay silent. This is the bane of Captain Marvel Jr.'s existence. He can never say his own name lest he turn back into Freddie Freeman. Thankfully he was able to find his own way around this, going by the name CM3 to avoid transforming, but still, that's a rough weakness. Number 4. Yeah, this is just kinda humiliating. I'll say now that this has been retconned out, but for a time, Green Lantern rings could not be used against things that were the color yellow. Meaning if, say, Batman decided to just wear a yellow costume and paint a room yellow, there was basically nothing he could do against that. And yeah, he did that. All-Star Batman and Robin. Interesting moment. Anyway, the explanation for this was that a fear elemental called the Parallax Entity was imprisoned in the Green Lantern Central Power Battery by the Guardians of the Universe. This effectively created the yellow impurity within the green light of will, which admittedly is an okay explanation for it, but god, that is still a really dumb weakness. Number 3. Now, I know he's not a superhero by any stretch, however, he's had moments as an anti-hero, and frankly as a weakness, this is a pretty good one. So Mr. Mxyzptlk, yeah, I'm definitely gonna get some feedback on that pronunciation, is an imp from the 5th dimension who is more or less just a troublemaker. Think of it like you're the visitor in Roller Coaster Tycoon, and he's the tweezers dropping you into the middle of the lake. And the only way you can stop him is to trick him into saying his own name backwards, Kel-Tip Zixum, which, given how hard it is to even read, his name sounds like a nightmare. But thankfully, it proves fairly easy enough to deal with him, with Superman having once done it with a knock-knock joke. Although this weakness was actually removed after the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, it's actually a pretty unique, albeit weird weakness to have. Number 2. Mon-El, a character with a similar origin story to Superman, came to Earth in a spaceship and also spoke Kryptonian. As it turns out, he is actually from a race called the Daxamites, who originally were Kryptonians but left Krypton to explore new worlds. However, because of modifications to their birthing matrix by the Eradicator, they no longer possess their weakness to kryptonite, but instead a weakness to lead. Which seems like that's maybe a lot worse. I mean, obviously I'm being Earth-centric here, but when bullets are made of lead, and Earth has a lot of lead, it seems like his powers don't amount to much when your average soldier can put him down. Although perhaps even worse is how we find out about that weakness. Superboy, paranoid that Mon-El is trying to trick him, creates a fake kryptonite rock made of lead, and as a result, gives Mon-El irreversible lead poisoning. And the solution to this? Send him to the Phantom Zone and let him just stay there so he doesn't die. Yeah, Good job, Superboy. Number 1. Yeah, I am leaping far away from Marvel and DC here. So Captain Planet, the infamous TV series from the 1990s, centered around 5 kids who got their superpowers from magic rings, and through the powers of environmentalism, used them together to summon the being known as Captain Planet. Yeah, the 90s had a lot of educational television. That said, Captain Planet had one particular weakness, that being pollution. And given that the show centered around villains whose entire goals were deforestation, poaching, and literally pollution, it might not have been ideal to send that guy in. Like, if a villain ever made its base on Garbage Island, it'd basically be impenetrable.